Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Before I begin my story, let's clear something up. I am not a drug addict or an alcoholic. I have never had problems with my nerves or mentality. I have only heard about hallucinations. I know all crazy people say that, but believe me, after what happened, I voluntarily signed up for a shrink because I began to doubt my own mental health. It turned out to be absolutely correct. Unfortunately, Chesniak, anons, it would be a huge relief for me now to get a ticket to the Yellow House with a diagnosis for schizophrenia or some other serious disorder. In this case, it would turn out that I am abnormal, that is, I just strayed from the course of the norm prescribed by people. And now it turns out that the world around us is abnormal. But no one prescribed norms for the world, right? Scholars to this day are unable to explain a whole list of phenomena and paradoxes. This gives me a bad idea. Perhaps what has become the craziest nightmare of my life is actually a completely natural order of things for the world. And it happens all the time. Every corner. Maybe even every second. But let's talk about everything in order. My story begins more than peacefully. A few years ago, I was a student who thought about studying only at the height of the semester and divided the rest of the time between barbecue gatherings, the war for women's attention, and World of Tanks. The last point became the starting point of my story. At the Forum of Tankers, I met one dude, let's call him N. Our fruitful combat cooperation soon crept to the level of contact friendship and later resulted in lengthy text conversation, which over time became more chill and soulful. Although N has become the root cause of all my current problems, I still cannot think of this man without respect. He was downright erudite guy with a broad outlook beyond his years, which is not often found among other players. However, N was a little older than me and lived a very difficult life. When we met, hardly a year had passed since the death of his last living relative, his paternal grandfather. What happened to the rest of the family, I don't know. He never talked about it, and I considered it tactless to ask questions on such a topic. But instead of giving up on studies and drowning sadness in cheap alcohol, and invested every second of his freedom to his future. He woke up early in the morning, went to some part-time jobs in local institution, then went to the capital for evening classes. By the beginning of the trouble described in my story, he had already graduated from art school and taught drawing at a local school, and at the same time he was doing all sorts of interesting things. He painted portraits, sold landscapes on the internet, and even painted temples. At times I envied he is living a great easy life. All his life, and had only one roof over his head. It was located in one of the shattered Khrushchev houses in the Pravdinsky village. What, you haven't heard of this? Before meeting N, I had never heard of it myself. A specific but fun location about an hour and a half by train from my home in Moscow. There are two wonderful things not far from Pravdinsky. Firstly, a great wild forest with swamps, gullies, pine forest, and other decor from the stories of Vitaly Bianchi. And secondly, such a sickly reservoir, in its splendor is in no way inferior to natural reservoirs. Last but not least, I decided to visit this wilderness because of the reservoir. It all turned out like this. N and I left with our homes almost simultaneously. I'm a little earlier, he's a little later, but damn. I indulged in whining and depression, and N, due to his love of life, quickly remembered the principle: if you got a lemon, then ask for salt and tequila. I have no girlfriend, so I'm living the bachelor life. Deciding to cheer up both of us, he invited me to visit him for a weekend, go fishing. It was one of our common hobbies. Although the last time I held a fishing rod in my hands was 5 years ago, I was ready to enjoy the opportunity to participate in one of my favorite pastimes again. In the end, I lost much more than I expected. But, as already mentioned, first things first. All in all, it didn't take long to convince me. Since the beginning of the week, I could hardly sit still, looking forward to a glorious weekend with cheap alcohol, the splashing of fish in a plastic bucket, and the chirping of cicadas in the hot afternoon sun. On Friday morning, I grabbed a packed backpack and went to the Yaroslavl railway station. There were 3 steps ahead of me, 2 of which I was going to spend with excellent company. I was in a good mood. I would like to poetically describe the beauties of Pravdinsky area, but they went to hell for 2 reasons. Firstly, who needs it? And secondly, I don't particularly remember them. Only a clear division of the neighborhood into 2 halves remained in memory. One, boring, was occupied by the newly built cottages of rich and small older cottages. But the second, much more interesting, a remnant from the 90s. Near the forest, 5-story buildings, garages, boxes with peeling paint, moldy stalls selling expired Coke, and their fellow villagers with moronic names were mothballed. But the most amusing part of the village was the local natives, with all their appearance and manners. They made it clear that their ways will survive the passage of time, and met me at the station. Soon we were stocking up on essential fishing necessities: beer, bread, ham, beer, and food, in case we didn't catch anything, cigarettes, crackers, beer, and more beer. In real life, N turned out to be as entertaining a conversationalist as he was online, and therefore time flew by unnoticed. In general, I can't remember anything interesting. The fishing trip has become more of a mixture of sightseeing, drinking, mosquito slapping, and trying to swim. We only caught a couple of shabby fish, but that didn't spoil the fun. Which, by the way, I don't really remember either. But the moment from which everything began to imperceptibly roll downhill, I remember. I remember it very well. In the evening, when Ann and I were already heading to his lair, we caught sight of the rusty skeleton of a domestic typewriter. It stuck out straight from the grass that spread along the very edge of the forest. A couple of boys scurried around beside it. Unable to restrain our curiosity, we asked why they were busy with this junk. The boys told us they were catching lizards. The unspent fishing excitement made itself felt. We decided to help them and together turn the typewriter on its side. The spectacle that opened up stuck in my memory for a long time. In one of the ruts, which had been traced by iron, a tangle of small brown bodies stirred. Looks like we gutted a lizard nest or something. From two drunken men moving scrap metal, one should not expect accuracy. The lizard bodies, crumpled and crushed, were bleeding. Some of the lizards in agony threw off their tails. The lizards trampled each other to try to escape. The mood immediately deteriorated. No one had any intention of playing flayers. Of course, we wanted to fish out the lizards, but we were not going to kill or maim them at all. The boys just didn't bother to think before acting. I'm not very superstitious, but at times I still wonder if I received a warning sign in this way. If so, then a dozen reptiles gave their lives in vain. I was a free, drunken bachelor that day, out of my daily routine, and not about to let a bunch of lizards ruin my weekend. Then I generally quickly forgot about them. I remembered much later, when, well, yes, first things first. In short, Ann and I apologized to the boys for our bloody failure and returned to the apartment to play video games. Our gatherings went like clockwork, stupid and fun. We were dying to some mods, streamers, updates, and other stuff. A stone's throw from the Khrushchev, where N lived, there was a night shop with the silly name Tina. Inside, posters from 30 years ago with post-Soviet hairs hung, and beer was sold in plastic, which, it seems, was good for these posters. But they didn't even hear about the dry law there. It's a typical local theme. This Tina supplied us with alcohol and tobacco all evening, and, no doubt, could supply us all night. But then the main problem of my tale showed up. It showed up right when we were playing. Finally, N turned on World of Warships, starting to tell me about different secrets of the game. I was torn between respect for my comrade and the desire to take his mouse away from him when I heard this. A dull but distinct knock on the door. Bang bang, boo boo, boo boo, like a parody of heart sounds. They pounded so rhythmically that at first I attributed it to the sounds of repair. Well, you never know who will crack in the head to hammer a nail at the end of the day. And why would someone drum on the door when there is a buzzer? Carried away by the battle, N did not notice all this noise at all. And the knocking did not stop, although it did not become more insistent either. The blows were repeated harmoniously and monotonously, as if someone was persistently sending a signal in Morse code. The situation was getting weird. Too weird to ignore. Unable to stand it, I tore N away from the monitor and forced him to listen. Reluctantly, my comrade turned his head towards the door, continuing to follow the approaching enemy out of the corner of his eye. In the first few seconds, it seemed that he would ignore my words altogether, but when this rhythmic boo-boo finally reached N, it was then that his mood completely shifted. I could have expected any reaction other than the one that followed. He abruptly turned off the speakers, jumped up from the table, and turned as white as a sheet. On the monitor, his ship was mercilessly damaged, but N suddenly lost all interest in the game. I just ripped the bandage off. "Grish," said N in what seemed to me a trembling voice.
"Go to the front door and stand."
Why? I wondered, but N ignored my question.
"Get up and listen. Don't look into the eye. If they stop knocking, hide in the bathroom. Slam the door louder so I can hear it."
Are you kidding me? What the hell?
"Do what I say."
I heard something change in his voice. Maybe it's called fear. Perhaps it barely contained panic. And my friend, by the way, is not one of the shy ones. But no matter what I heard in N's voice, I immediately got sick of asking questions. It also got pretty damn uncomfortable. On unsteady legs, I trudged to the door. But when I arrived at my destination, the knocking stopped abruptly, as if the knocker had suddenly grown tired of what he was doing. And just as I was about to rush to the bathroom on N's orders, they started knocking again. However, now it sounded different, more muffled and as if from the other side. It dawned on me that they were now knocking on the next door. Neither the rhythm nor the strength of the blows have changed. It looks like the behavior of an annoying kid. But why is there complete silence outside the door? Why doesn't anyone open up to him? Why don't they at least yell at him to get out and stop pounding on the door? Why don't the neighbors react to knocking at all? I already wanted to tell in about this, but when I saw what he was doing, I forgot the words out of surprise. He managed to close everything, all the windows in the apartment with heavy Soviet curtains. When I turned around, I saw In frantically running around the rooms, fastening the gaps between the fabrics with pins and stubs of wire. "What are you doing?" I couldn't help it, I hissed in a whisper. "Seriously, N, what the hell is this?" N still did not answer, continuing to do his job. And the knocking continued. After a while, he moved even further. Judging by the remoteness of the sound, they were already bursting on the door on the other side of the hallway. What I just did not change my mind in those minutes. That the locals are doing some kind of warning in such a strange way. That a violent drug addict familiar to the residents of the block once again forgot where his apartment is located. That here once there was an incident with a maniac or a robber to whom someone inadvertently opened the door, and now the whole house is panicking, even if an ordinary bum is knocking, wanting to beg for 50 or 2. And who in my situation would not try to find a rational explanation, even the most ridiculous. Meanwhile, N finished with the curtains and came up to me. To myself, I noted the strange jerkiness of his movements. The last gesture surprised me perhaps more than anything else. N nervously snatched a piece of gray nag from his pocket and stuck it on the peephole of the door. This was already too much for all my theories about homeless people and maniacs. What is happening has completely lost its meaning. From the moment we heard the knock, N's usual talkativeness disappeared without a trace. Now he spoke in curt and short sentences. He didn't act like him at all. N, poking at the door with some kind of mortuary look, turned to me.
I went over, Grish. The head is cracking. Let's go to bed. Tomorrow we'll get up early. We'll go to a couple of good places.
Okay, I muttered, continuing to listen to the sounds outside the door. I listened for half the night, if not longer, lying on the cot prepared by N, sleep not in one eye. I listened even after the pounding had stopped, expecting that this heartbeat sound was about to resume. Bang bang, boo boo. Finally, I started to drift off to sleep. Thoughts became confused, the ghostly voices of a rolling dream sounded in my ears. I almost passed out when I suddenly realized. Our brains are such jokers, to eat it into convolutions. It is in those few seconds on the verge of sleep and wakefulness that he often fishes out a super sudden thought from the subconscious. The one that for some reason did not come to mind, despite its obviousness. This is exactly the thought that happened to me. I twitched, opening my eyes sharply, as if I had been electrocuted and sweaty all at once. Steps. I never heard footsteps, even a hint of at least some sound of movement. No rustling, no shuffling, nothing at all. I distinctly heard how this knocker with pedantic accuracy came to every door in the entrance until he disappeared from the field of hearing. But in the intervals between knocks on different doors, absolute silence reigned. It was as if this, whoever it was floating silently through the air. I don't think local homeless people can do that. To be honest, I hate being scared. Usually it's easy for me to overcome him, but that night it was different. As soon as the absence of steps dawned on me, I wanted to jump up from the couch, run out of the apartment and rush without looking back to Moscow itself. Even to Alaska or Shambhala, if only away from this Khrushchev with its knocking ghosts. How I managed to keep myself in place, I myself did not understand. Get and sleep. Who knows? Judging by the fact that neither snoring nor sniffling came from his bed, we were both awake until dawn. Only when the sky began to brighten and the morning birds began to chirp did I finally take a nap. I had an unpleasant dream. I forgot about him immediately after waking up, but recently I remembered again, and with amazing clarity, as if I had just seen him. I dreamed of deep earth, cold and hard-packed. I walked where my eyes look. Right through the thickness of this earth. It was as if she were a disembodied illusion, or as if I was the illusion myself. Stuffy, dark and cramped, the earth pressed on me from all sides, so I desperately looked for at least some glimpse of an exit, but there was none. Everywhere, back and forth, up and down, countless kilometers of soil stretched without end. I woke up with icy limbs and chills all over my body, although the sun was in full swing outside. N was already brewing a refreshing coffee to the sound of a cheerful heavy car from the stereo. When I crawled out into the kitchen, he greeted me cheerfully, as if nothing had happened the night before. This idiotic, frankly strained gaiety has beaten off any desire to talk about nightly knocks, and was not going to explain anything to me, except perhaps some preconceived excuse. And I decided to play along with him. After all, I didn't want to ruin the rest of the weekend either. But, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't completely get the cloudy anxiety out of my head. In the afternoon I told Anne that I wanted to take a walk. In part, this was true. I really went to wander around the area, only my nervous walking did not at all resemble a walk. I just wanted to think about what happened. Perhaps it makes no sense to describe the crumpled thoughts that randomly rushed about in my head while I plowed through the village with my steps. The main event of that day occurred when I stopped to smoke, almost back to the ill-fated Khrushchev. I smoked behind garages, exactly the same as those that hid me from my parents' eyes in the distant school days. All those shells and rusted iron boxes are perfect for hiding, so I almost dropped my cigarette when a nondescript pensioner emerged from their ranks. However, without showing aggression, the old man amiably asked the light and threw a couple of phrases in the clear hope of starting a conversation. I was not at all in the mood to chat with anyone, but I also did not want to offend Grandpa with my silent departure. I had to keep the conversation going. The old man introduced himself as Grandfather Mika and asked if I had moved here long ago. No, I'm just visiting a friend for a couple of days. I gave the name and surname of and maybe you know someone like that. He painted a church in a neighboring village.
From the 19th apartment. Of course I do. Nice guy. So did you stay with him? Did you hear Snitch last night? You're out of luck.
Whom? I asked again, although in fact I immediately cleared what it was about.
Well, how?
Grandpa Mika was surprised, dropping ashes on washed sweatpants. Someone broke into our place late at night, if that's what you're talking about. I felt something close to relief. Since this dude has already been given a nickname, it is likely that this is really a crazy local, and I screwed myself crazy out of fright.
And didn't tell you anything.
Grandpa Mika continued his interrogation, suddenly angry.
Fucking idiot.
Okay, I'm not scared.
And in vain. Well, how would you accidentally look into the eye? Tell N to think with his head next time, not with his asshole.
I'm completely lost. What should he be thinking about?
You see, it's not only impossible for him to open it. It is also dangerous to look at him at the other snitch.
What other snitch?
The one you heard yesterday. He's been roaming around since the building, maybe even earlier. We are used to it. Shuika sensed that it was impossible to contact him. But visitors, especially urban ones, will not understand this in any way. Trouble usually comes to them.
I don't understand, I said honestly. Grandfather Mika shook his head and threw the bowl to the ground. Only then did I notice that my cigarette had already burned down to the filter.
And I'll tell you, listen.
And I began to listen. In general, no one really knew what the snitch was, because no one saw him. But everyone heard. The snitch came in frequently, only a few times a year. The gap between his visits could last a couple of days, and could stretch to weeks, months, and even 6 months. The frequency of his visits did not depend on the phase of the moon, or on the season, or on anything else, but still, even this mysterious power observed 2 rules. First, the snitch appeared only at night, between 9 in the evening and 1 in the morning. Second, Snitch never used bells, preferring to pull handles or bang stupidly on the door, for which he got his nickname. No one knew whether a snitch was on the street, but just in case, the windows were barricaded and even covered with curtains. It is not known exactly how many people could theoretically encounter this thing and how many fell under its influence. They would probably prefer not to talk about it, but all 3 fatal cases, after which there was no doubt about the friendliness of the snitch, Mika's grandfather personally witnessed. The first trouble happened in the mid-80s. Covered, oddly enough, one of the old-timers. Directly above the apartment of Grandfather Mika lived an ancient old man who had already crossed the line of 90 years. Despite good health and an independent lifestyle, and this says a lot at such an age, the old man did not think well. Once Grandfather Mika heard that during the round of Snitch, his neighbor from above would open his door and invite it in. There were no blows, screams, or other suspicious sounds. Just from that event, the old man stopped leaving his apartment. The locals immediately understood what was going on. It was not difficult to put 2 and 2 together, remembering the date of the snitch's last visit. At first, everyone was afraid to meddle in that house. But in the end, someone's sympathy outweighed fear, and he decided to visit the old man. He did not open. Frustrated, the compassionate tenant called the police. The old man did not open the door for the police either. The cops tried to open it themselves. Failed. Some kind of brigade was called there to solve such situations. They began to open the door. 3 grinders broke. 3 fucking grinders on a rotten door in a Soviet ruin, yes. Maybe Grandfather Mika embellished this moment, but to break even one, even the most rusty, on a wooden door, this was extremely strange. During this fuss, the neighbors whispered and called the house manager. He clearly had a non-standard thinking for such a position, because he knew everything about Snitch perfectly well. Perhaps a feature of the provincial mindset. From the stories of Mika's grandfather, one got the impression that the residents of Khrushchev treated Snitch without any intrigue, but as a domestic problem, such as a leaking roof. A fix does not work, so we will get along. In general, our government rushed in, without further questions, somehow agreed with representatives of the law, announced to everyone the legend. They say, the apartment is in poor condition, so it will be temporarily sealed. I don't know what conditions that rolled out there and who eventually got the property, but since then no one has come into the apartment. It still stands all sealed up for no apparent reason. What's inside? Where did the poor old man go? No one had the desire to seek answers to these questions. I'm not an exception. The next victims of the snitch were 3 people at once. It happened almost 20 years after the disappearance of the neighbor. One of the tenants died. I sincerely hope that at least he died a natural death, and a young family came to his empty housing, some kind of relatives who received the living space by inheritance. They were such nice people, grandfather Mika lamented during the story. The son of the owner, it seems, lived with his wife and 2-year-old daughter. They were quite young. Of course, he was warned about the snitch. And of course, the peppy young father of the family in the prime of his life did not take the local superstitions seriously. When the snitch knocked at his door, he naively opened it and found no one there. His neighbor found out about this, to whom the man complained in the morning about the night hooligans. We didn't notice anything wrong at first. Already began to think maybe it has passed. And then here. The first wake-up call for the neighbors was the absence of the voices of his wife and daughter in the ill-fated apartment. But the voice of a man seemed to address them from time to time, and he answered questions about his family quite confidently. So the locals just shrugged their shoulders. You never know what quirks in a strange family. And then a very unambiguous smell of corpses began to ooze from the apartment. It was summer, and the stench quickly reached that limit, after which any normal person would start sounding the alarm. As a result, several locals pressed the new settlers harder. He was surprised, as if he did not understand what he was talking about. Angry neighbors broke into his house and found a picture in the style of a classic horror. His wife's corpse sat in the kitchen, torso dropped on a fly-covered table, while his dead daughter lay on a rug in one of the rooms, surrounded by coloring books and crayons. It may not have been quite like that, but the essence is different. Their whole appearance spoke of the fact that the unfortunate themselves did not notice how they died. And what is even stranger, the head of the family himself did not notice this. One of the intruders, shaking with horror, told how a man complained to his dead wife about an uninvited guest and reassured his daughter, who was supposedly frightened by his intrusion. As a result, the cops pinned the murder on the father, who until the last acted as if his family were alive. He shouted to his wife that he would return soon, that this was some kind of mistake, and so on. His further fate was unknown to grandfather Mika. It seems to be sent to an asylum. But Grandpa Mika knew something else. The cause of the death of the woman and the girl remained unknown. His comrade served somewhere in the investigative department and mentioned that in fact there were no signs of violence on the corpses. There was nothing on them at all. They were not strangled, they were not stabbed, they were not poisoned. It is not clear in what way they bled. The visiac was sewn onto the peasant with a stretch. The police spent 3 days trying to find evidence of some kind to back the accusation. Well, yes, our prosecutor's office does not need much, so this case was soon closed and forgotten. Before the story about the third case, grandfather Mika broke down for a long time, stubbornly researched the topic. In short, he had to pull the information for a long time. In the end, he did tell. Apartments in Khrushchev almost never sold. It was not about Snitch, but about the banal distance from the city and the general lack of housing. But someone still managed to sell an apartment to a lonely man. They tried to warn the newcomer with devious, pseudo-adequate explanations, but he, like a gritzo, did not heed. Here we should add one detail about grandfather Mika. In the past he was an electrician, and if someone had something wrong, then for symbolic gratitude he eliminated this junk. That new guy called me once. Like, come, the electricity seems to be acting up, grandfather Mika said, and he himself is pale as a worm, and his hands move in all directions. Well, I realized right away that not everything is so simple, but I came. His plugs were wonderful, I'll tell you. And the peasant hesitated, and finally called me into the living room. And there is the door. Which door? And one that shouldn't be. It sticks out straight from the street wall. I don't know, maybe it was like that at first. You never know what oddities the owners have. The man is completely stunned, then he pours himself over and says, they say, tell me, father, I don't see this thing, do I? No, I answer him, it's definitely not imagining. I see it too. An ordinary door. Why would it be in a place where there is no room? Grandfather Mika paused thoughtfully. Oh, I didn't like that kind of thing. Honestly, I immediately wanted to run away, but I felt sorry for the guy. There is no face, everything is shaking, and why be surprised? I'd be shaking myself in his place. And often, he tells me, "Do you have this here?" Well, I don't need any extra words. Why, I say, did they knock just now? They knocked, he said, and he opened it but no one was there, and the next day this door appeared. Mika tells him, "I'm sorry, comrade, I don't know what to do with it." And he doesn't seem to hear. Mutters, "Listen, sir, someone was standing behind the door." That's when I realized, in fact, while we were talking, there was such a strange sound in the background, as if someone's breath was clogged. I went closer to the door. It was scary, but I also wanted to explore. I'm telling you for sure, they were puffing from there, right from behind the door. It was as if something big and heavy was dragging the air into itself with difficulty. And so I left. I was ashamed, but I could not do anything. But I really couldn't. I even walked around the house just in case. During the day, of course, suddenly there would be something on the wall outside. No, the wall is like a wall, nothing at all. What about the man? Grandfather Mika said that for about a week the newcomer kept leaving the apartment, with each appearance becoming paler and thinner. Once Grandfather Mika came up to him and asked, "Well, how are you holding up?" "I'm holding on, sir," the man replied wearily. "Only this is the case, because of the door I have more and more puffing. It's like they're getting closer. Don't you know why?" Mika's grandfather did not know, but such a detail completely discouraged him from approaching both the apartment and its owner. A few more days passed, and the said owner disappeared without a trace. This time, no mysterious door spell happened. A couple of months later it was opened. A couple of months later because the man lived alone, and there was no one to notice his disappearance. While the cops were roaming around the apartment, Grandfather Mika was afraid to stick his head out of his own lair. Not because of the police, of course, but because of what they might find there. By the way, rumors also spread about the discovery. Later, no, they crawled right away, but Grandfather Mika heard them later because he tried his best not to hear at all. It did not work. And they found nothing. At first they said that the apartment was just empty. No suspicious door, no owner. And then the rumor began to grow into details. They said that his things were not there. Clothes, utensils, linens, no household items at all. It would be logical to assume that the man just packed up and left. One thing remains incomprehensible. Why then did the cops come for another week to inspect this apartment and even ask the tenants about the missing neighbor? Here someone said that not only things were missing in the apartment, but there were no signs of life at all. There was no hair, bits of nails or skin, not even fingerprints. About a dozen people confirmed that the person had moved into the apartment and stayed there for several months, but the condition of the home indicated otherwise. So the servicemen suspected that the apartment had become the site of a well-planned crime, and that was all, unusually clever covering up of traces. They began to pick up the documents, trying to catch the owner on them. Fuck, something there. The owner has sunk into the ground. According to all the data, it turned out that it does not exist. The passport number was invalid, not listed in any database, like all other papers, by the way. Then there was a long trial, during which the seller of the apartment got it, because he was accused of either swindling, or forging documents, or something else. Then an elderly woman with her daughter bought the house. They were also warned. Apparently, the women turned out to be more cautious, because they lived safely there to this day. I didn't know what to say. Grandfather Mika threw all this out to me yesterday. I would only laugh, but now I was not laughing. Of course, he could lie and make elephants out of flies, but if 1/10 of that was the truth, then it was already fucked up. History, I muttered, shaking another cigarette out of the pack. Yes, I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, said Grandfather Mika, misinterpreting my confusion. I also messed up once. Drunk, I forgot to lower the curtains, but take the snitch and show up that night. I hid under the covers until morning, like a small child. I don't know what I was more afraid of, that I would see him, or that he would see me. So how is it? Did it work? Yes, it seems to have worked out, but it seems not. In terms of... Well, you see, I'm not lost. I'm standing here, alive, healthy, Papa. I didn't go crazy and didn't bury anyone, Papa again. But one day something happened. Not the worst we've had from Snitch, but I'd rather gouge my eye out than go through that again. I remained silent, not sure if I wanted to hear about it. Grandfather Mika got ahead of my objections by starting another story. The last one. When was it? In the 99th, or something, or in the 2000th? In general, then the first combination locks were installed. These panels, which are now standing, are not shiny. Then castles, like everything else, were more severe. A piece of iron is embedded in the door, and a dozen iron buttons stick out of it. Oh, no intercom calls for you, no magnets. If you don't know the code, it's free. And I kept forgetting it. Flew out of my head. Well, at least you burst. Maybe it was too new, or maybe I rarely went into the entrance alone. In a word, sometimes I had to hang around under the door and wait for someone to come in or out. Well, we rarely had to wait longer than 10 minutes. It was possible for neighbors from the first floors to knock on the window on the Craniac. It doesn't matter, in general. And once I forgot the wire cutters at home, I had to turn back halfway. I'm standing, then, at the entrance. Time is running out. The working day is about to begin, but, as luck would have it, no one enters or leaves. I let the neighbors honk. He fought at one window, at another, silence everywhere. They left, they are sleeping, there is something else. They don't hear me, in a word. I completely despaired, began to press the buttons at random. The devils are not joking. Well, how can I guess? So what do you think? You guessed right. Then he swore to remember these damn numbers forever. I still remember them. 1, 2, 8, 9. Funny, huh? I'll tell you right away that there was no such code at our door, and close. However, she opened up to me. Probably, already at the entrance, not everything was fine, but I didn't pay attention. I was in a hurry. Maybe I would have noticed something right away, if not for the rush. And so I flew like an eagle to my apartment, and only there my soul stammered. Will you ask why? Yes, because I turned the key 4 times, although our door always closed only 2 turns. Where are 2 more to come from, huh? Then I did not attach any importance to this, but now I remember, and I want to slap myself in the face. It was necessary to drape right away, but what can I say now? I'm coming in, then. Nothing. Things are in their places. Outside the window is crappy autumn. I see my wire cutters are lying on the windowsill. I was repairing a dish rack the other day. I go up, take a tool. I accidentally looked out the window, and now I see there. Grandfather Mika fell silent, asking for a cigarette with a gesture. Having smoked it to the middle, he continued. You know what you can see from our windows? Playground for children, all sorts of trees. But at that time there was none of that. Nothing at all. I didn't even see the forest in the distance. Empty land to the horizon, like in the steppes, but not completely empty. Bushes grew on it. Very strange. Never heard of similar plants. Low, knee-deep. The twigs are thin, bent, and the leaves are dark. What is this color called? Such a filth. Either red or brown. Everywhere the bushes, yes, the sky. And the sky is weird too. From above it is yellow, closer to the ground it turns gray, below it begins to turn black. I made the sign of the cross even though I had not been to church since I was 3 years old. I go back to the door, but I don't take my eyes off the window, as if something will come out from outside if I turn away. I barely remember how I got to the hallway. Heart seems to stop beating. I just thought, oh, just to get out, just to get out. But that was not the worst thing. The main fear went when I stumbled over our threshold and fell out into the stairwell. As soon as I fell on the concrete, someone started pounding on the nearest door with all their might. I immediately remembered our Snitch, but now they were pounding from inside the apartment. And strongly as if they wanted to knock the door down. They pounded first on one door, then on another. And in the third. And in everything. That's what you want, I swear. Every damn door was hammered from the inside so that it seemed that the house was about to collapse. The floor is shaking, the glass is rattling. I thought I would die of fear right there. Yes, there was such a cry behind my back, words cannot describe. Imagine that a locomotive whistle is trying to yell with a human voice. Were you turning pale? Imagined. And what was it like for me? But this howl brought me to my senses. I jumped to my feet and I gave a chirp. I run, and the steps under me are shaking, my ears are pounding from a terrible roar. And I don't really know how, but I felt that something was rushing behind me too. Did not see, I didn't hear, but I knew, chasing me, breathing in my heels. In a few seconds, he jumped to the first floor, leaned against the front door and punched the button bang. He flew out into the street head over heels. Then everything. Darkness. I woke up already in bed. The wife sits next to her, shedding tears. Later I found out that I had a heart attack. But when he had just come to his senses, it was not up to that. Without asking anything, I rushed out the window to look. How relieved I was when everything turned out the old way. Trees, patio. For another year I went to the entrance only with my wife under my arm. When she went on business trips, I asked the neighbors to come with me to the apartment and look out the window with me. They are understanding people, they did not refuse. I'm still afraid of windows, by the way. Every time I look out the window, I seem to see the bushes again. And these leaves are not good. They will not leave me alone. Yes, I'm almost used to it. Previously, of course, I shuddered. You used to walk along the street, the sun was shining, there are people around, and there seems to be nothing to be afraid of. And then again, and you notice in the middle of a green branch 3 or 4 bastards of a bad color. At first, I ran away from such trees. Fall is a nightmare. In every withered leaf, the same thing was seen, although they really often mix with fallen leaves. Then I realized that you can even touch them, nothing terrible will happen. It's just kind of like a reminder to me. I myself did not notice from what moment Grandpa Mika's strange but consistent story began to seem to me the incoherent nonsense that crazy people usually carry. The anxiety grew stronger. At one point, I even wondered if Grandfather Mika himself was a local jerk who walks and knocks on apartments and then drives terrible stories about all sorts of informers. I was trying to discreetly turn on some melody on my smartphone in order to pass it off as a sudden call and quickly dump it, when Grandfather Mika suddenly leaned over with the words,
"Whoa, look at you, another one."
He brushed something off his abibas and then handed it to me. For a few seconds I silently looked at this leaf. A little leaf shaped like a birch. Only I am ready to give any part of the body for cutting off, that nothing similar grows on any birch. This leaf had a disgusting color, meat, carnal. It looks like either a raw heart or a rotting tumor. This color simply could not be in a photosynthetic organism. And, unfortunately, I looked long enough to notice one more detail. The leaf pulsed. I am absolutely sure that it was not my mistake, because the sight of rhythmically swelling veins simply mesmerized me. It felt like I could almost hear the boom boom in time with their trembling. I decided I've had enough. Muttering the words of farewell, I walked away from Grandpa Mika, having time to notice his apologetic look. But now I don't give a damn if I offend the pensioner with my flight or not. I started towards N.'s house at the fastest pace I could. The Snitch, who disappeared with the night, scared me much less than the garbage that Grandfather Mika unhooked from his sweatpants. On the way to Khrushchev, I stubbornly inspired myself, fuck the Snitch. Fuck Grandpa Mika with his leaves. Screw all this. You heard a couple of good cool stories, Gregory, and now, be kind, throw them out of your memory to hell with dogs. Whatever happens here, it doesn't concern you. Tomorrow you will return to Moscow, and this dregs will remain here. It's not good to groom mystical paranoia with the stories of some old asshole. Come back to the apartment, sip alcohol, shake and go to the reservoir one more time, spend the rest of the weekend cool, damn it. Pretend like nothing happened. Smart plan, amigo. I fastened until late in the evening. I had the strongest intentions to overcome the desire to litter my trousers and piss off to the safety of Moscow. But as darkness fell, my nerves capitulated. Trying to somehow save face, I defiantly rummaged through the phone, and then told N that literally this very second a colleague texted me. They say, "Tomorrow we have a movement planned in the office. There's no way without me. The boss himself demands my presence. Let and belatedly, now helpless amateurs. They won't let you rest. Oh, what a reluctance way to take the train to the train. I would love to stay, honestly, but the bosses are beasts. The project is on fire. ZP won't work on its own," and he listened to the diarrhea of my excuses quite calmly, and only shook his head sympathetically a couple of times. Purely for appearances, no doubt. It was evident from his face that he understood everything perfectly. Having collected my clothes with lightning speed, I hastily said goodbye to my friend and rushed away from this strange house. And first of all, out of shame for their own cowardice, having already found myself at the edge of the forest, about 20 meters from the Khrushchev, I did something that in no case should be done in my position. I turned around. I just wanted to take a last look at this filthy building. To make sure that at least from the outside it looks like an ordinary old building. That the story that is created inside it does not seep out in any way. And my beliefs in the same second collapsed. At first it seemed to me that a massive shadow from a tree fell on the wall of the Khrushchev. Much later, I realized that Khrushchev was standing in a cleared area, and there was no vegetation there, except for bushes near the entrance. And then my deceptive hope was destroyed by another event. The shadow moved. It slid down a little and put its limb on the sill of the upper window. Whether it was a paw, a leg, or something else, I don't know. Yes, to be honest, I don't care about her anatomy. Instead of rushing away or at least hiding, I froze, afraid not only to move, but even to breathe. And he continued to stare blindly at this fucker. Do you know the feeling when something frightening causes at the same time an irresistible desire to turn away and not take your eyes off? I am one of those people whose second desire outweighs. So, unfortunately, I saw his entire route from start to finish. Although my memory obligingly retains every second of this spectacle, I still don't fully understand the mechanics of its movement. The upper part of the body was extended, lowering down the teardrop-shaped lower part with two processes. What it consists of and what color it is, I did not understand. It does not black, and I also did not notice something similar to a head. The sprouts probably gave him support. Hell, I don't know. If I saw correctly, it used the outer window sills as steps. In any case, I retained the feeling of his measured movements. This is how a worker moves at a construction site, going down a long staircase. Top, 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 only without stomping. And without any other sound. I could hear the rustle of leaves, the chirping of evening cicadas. I remember the carefree childish laughter that came from afar, which, combined with the performance I observed, sounded terribly out of place. But not a single hint of sound from the crawling creature. And I, like a hypnotized rabbit, continued to stare motionlessly at her, even when the teardrop-shaped dark carcass was one step from the ground. The instinct of self-preservation was tearing me apart. What to do? Run. What if it notices me? But what if it has already noticed and is moving slowly so as not to frighten off the prey? Will I be able to escape in this case? While I was tormented by conflicting impulses, the teardrop-shaped monster had already lowered one of the chutes to the ground and passed through it. No, she didn't disappear. And didn't make a hole. It just sank down without meeting any resistance, as if the firmament of the earth was not there at all. And then she slowed down sharply, as if her limb found support. There. At the bottom. Underground. For the next few seconds, I watched how the carcass methodically, without slowing down its ladder rhythm, continued to descend through the ground. For some reason, I am sure that not a single speck of dust on the ground flinched. But there was something even stranger. Much weirder. The movements did not change their regularity at all. It was as if it kept pacing up the window ledges. It was like building continued there, underground. As if instead of a foundation there were the same floors with windows of living rooms. Of course, then I did not realize the reason for my sharply jumping horror. This rhythmic regularity with which the creature disappeared into the ground frightened me more than anything else. The very fact of its existence, the incorporeal penetration underground, what's there, even the fear of being discovered seemed insignificant compared to the feelings that the conjecture about the continuation of the house underground caused. After a few steps the creature disappeared without a trace. In front of me was an ordinary tattered 5-story building. Alas, I was already well aware of the deceitfulness of my impressions. I can't say how long I stood still after the dark thing disappeared underground, since my mind was already starting to race. I wandered towards the station, but I did not run and did not move with the crouching gait of a stealth survivalist. After a while my brain seemed to work again, but somehow walked in the wrong direction. I did not follow the road and did not thank the Almighty for salvation, in a word, did not generate any relevant thoughts. Instead, I thought about the Khrushchev. About its underground floors. I thought about how many there are and how deep they go down. About how much longer the teardrop carcass would have to thrash about with its appendages before it reached the end. If there was one. About whether there are rooms behind glass windows that are covered with dirt. I don't know what happens inside them. I remember these thoughts of mine, but I don't remember at all how I got out to the station, either at random or the autopilot turned on. In any case, I have never been so happy about the drunken roulades of the railway station boozers and the flickering of dirty lamps on the side of the road. Finally, I returned to my world, no matter how shitty, but familiar and understandable. It would be nice to end the story on this. To write that, they say, I arrived in Moscow, overdone the time away from the shock, and now I myself am not sure of the reality of what happened. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Pravdinsky. If that were the case, I wouldn't be rubbing my fingers on the keyboard right now. The culmination of fucked up, which shook my nerves and confidence in my own adequacy, struck just a couple of months ago, when the events in Pravdinsky had almost ceased to be my nightmares, and life had flowed into the knurled course. Yes, nothing much has changed. I still suffered, dragged myself to work, and spent the evenings with tanks and communication with N. We didn't mention it. Both, as if by agreement, feigned selective amnesia. We remembered fishing, reviewing ships, but we didn't even stutter about a knock on the door. And at the end of winter, N disappeared. At first I did not attach any importance to this. Well, you never know, he is a busy person, he can have any number of reasons to drop out of online. Only a few days later I realized that his disappearance could not be due to domestic reasons. His VK page also disappeared. Moreover, our dialogue has disappeared. I think everyone knows that the Vykontashevsky dialogue continues to hang in an unchanged state on your account, even if the interlocutor deletes the page. However, I scrolled through the list of conversations from MITZU more than once. There was no text within there. In complete bewilderment, I climbed to look for him on different accounts and forums. Empty. He disappeared from the list of friends. When asked for his nickname, the forum gave a message about a zero search result. But what bothered me the most was the disappearance of all his posts and messages. As if he had never registered on all these sites. But I perfectly remembered his contribution to the tank treasury of knowledge, posts about strategies, reviews of new models, invitations to the team, reports from the battlefield. He led a very active network life, so it would take a lot of effort and time to cover up his traces. My anxiety escalated into psychosis when I decided to contact our mutual world of tank friends. No words are enough to describe the feelings of the friendly question, "Who is this?" caused to me. Not a single vicious tanker has bothered to get at least one memory of N out of his convolutions. Except for me. And when you remember a person that no one else, not even the almighty web, can remember, it's dumb. I confess, after this I was more worried about myself than for N actually. That's why I decided to take the last step. Namely, on a second visit to Pravdinsky. I decided that if anyone could know about N's disappearance, it would be his housemates. I had the highest hopes, of course, for grandfather Mika, but I hoped that in which case the rest of the tenants would show understanding. The next day, I packed a backpack, pulled on my hiking clothes, and left by an early train. Those were the last minutes of my normal life. I did not know the address because N met me at the station and escorted me straight to the entrance. Fortunately, I have an excellent visual memory. I memorized every path, every alley, and every tent that came across to me along the way. Therefore, it was not difficult for me to go to the 5-story building where N lived. Only now he disappeared. I expected anything. That N's apartment would be sealed up, that not a single tenant would remember him, or even that the house would be empty and abandoned. But oh my, I was absolutely not ready for the flat, overgrown with shrubland in the place of the Khrushchev. There could be no mistake. Here is an old school playground with rusty swings. Here is a bent lantern, in the light of which I saw it. There are rows of garages behind which we smoked with grandfather Mika. And even if it was all just a similar entourage, then the second store with the moronic name Tina definitely could not exist either in Pravdinsky or anywhere else. Barely holding back the shaking in my hands and voice, I went in there, instantly recognizing a faded poster with blue hairs, and asked the saleswoman where the nearest residential building might be. It seems that I still had the same, because the saleswoman spoke carefully, as if with a violent lunatic. Oddly enough, there was another 5-story building nearby. I even went to check it out just in case. No, she certainly had nothing to do with N's place of residence. Firstly, she looked completely different, and secondly, I walked to her from Tina for about 15 minutes, although at night N and I ran out for beer for 2 minutes, 3. I still went to the 5-story building, went up to floor N and called the apartment with his number. The door was opened by an elderly woman with one cat in her arms and the second in the knee area. When asked how long she had been living here, the woman silently slammed the door. Well, I still had time. Until evening, I was looking for a familiar 5-story building, combing the village up and down. There was a hope in my soul that I still managed to stray from the route and come to the wrong place. From time to time I typed in, I don't know why, invalid number dialed. Fuck. Already in the dark, I headed back to the station with empty hands, empty eyes, and an empty head. Not the slightest trace of N, Khrushchev, Mika, nothing at all that could at least slightly clarify the situation. Instead, things only got worse. So it seemed to me then. In fact, everything just went to hell. That's how I screwed up my day off and my nerves. I returned home full of guilt, after which I immediately fell asleep. Not even undressed properly. And woke up at night. From the knock. At the front door. My apartment. Mind. It's almost funny. Even through a dream I recognized this rhythm. I even remembered hearing it a couple of times in my nightmares. I knew exactly who was knocking on my door. Well, yes, my old friend, who should not be real. Where the hell did N and grandfather Mika go when I need them more than anyone else in the whole world? Now it was too late to pretend that nothing had happened. They won't let me. This knock, repeated every night, will not allow. A couple of times the creature tried to deceive me by pulling the door handle. And it never rang the bell. All according to the commandments of grandfather Mika. Except that it happened more than a few times a year. Night after night, as if on an alarm clock, I was awakened by a rhythmic knock on the door. How did such a dull sound manage to wake me up? And although everything returned to normal in the morning, the rest of the night turned into a real nightmare for me. Diligently pretending to be asleep, in fact, I was chattering my teeth under the covers and recalling the words of Grandpa Mika. I don't know what I was more afraid of, that I would see him or that he would see me. I was not at all interested in how it found me and what it wanted. I tried not to think about it at all, as if avoiding thinking about it would help avoid meeting it. But it's hard, not to think about something that constantly makes its presence known. At first I just endured. I wanted to get used to it. Then he stopped thinking normally at work due to lack of sleep. I decided that it couldn't go on like this. I came up with an interesting theory with self-hypnosis, hallucinations, and other things. It was somehow reassuring. I went to the doctors, stocked up with wheels. The latter has borne fruit. Barbiturates plunged me into a deep oblivion, from which even the trumpets of Jericho cannot be pulled out, and after a week of such therapy, the hope of returning to a normal life dawned in me again, but then it started. That which cannot end until now. Every morning I see my yard, where I have lived all my life. I know him to the smallest detail. A tree under the window, a playground with a slide, a swing, a sandpit, a school in the distance, an electrical panel and houses, the neighboring building of ours on the right, 2 9-story buildings opposite, a 12-story building on the left. 4 houses. and then there were 3 left. When I missed one lantern from the balcony, I somehow managed to close my eyes to it. When the bird cherry disappeared under the window, I convinced myself that it had been cut down. But when the whole house just took and sunk into oblivion. At this point, all my attempts to remain calm failed. And the worst thing is that it was only the beginning. About 2 weeks ago, I noticed a strange silence that reigned outside the walls of my apartment. Through our skinny walls, I always heard the voices of neighbors and all sorts of everyday sounds, such as TV, dishes, vacuum cleaners. Now there was none of that. Only at night the silence was broken by the already habitual knocks on the door. I learned to ignore these sounds, but I could not get used to the silence, although I tried hard. My patience snapped after one bad day at work. It's disgusting when your workday starts with the front door of your office disappearing. But it's even worse when the office itself disappears. I stood like an idiot in my formal clothes, with a backpack on my back, and looked like a fool at a clean painted wall, behind which, I'm sure, there was nothing. Nothing at all. Confused going down the stairs, I asked the cleaning lady I met where the 49th office was located. She looked at me in the same confused way and said she didn't know. The cleaning lady who cleaned the floor in this room every day doesn't know where it is. In a panic, I ran outside and looked around the building. 8th, first floor. Checked the address through the application. All right. No mistake. The same address that I went to work every weekday for 3 years in a row. Everything converged, except for my home office, in the place of which an empty wall now rose. Well, I had no choice but to go home. On the way, the shock subsided a little, and thoughts strangely began to return to a sober course. Apparently, to divert my mind, I suddenly thought of a more pressing problem. I no longer have a source of income. And worse than that, I had to receive the last salary any day. You understand, this meant that the previous pay was practically used up. Of course, you can get a new job or freelance, but this is a shitty option when funds are running out. As soon as I emerged from the subway, I dialed the number of my most altruistic friend. Everyone, probably, has such a person who owes a considerable amount, but you still continue to pull good things out of him with the promise to return everything. So I had such good-naturedness. I mentally tuned my voice to the irresistible charm frequency as everything went to hell again. Invalid number dialed. I cursed out loud. I received reproachful glances from passers-by. When the pipe bleeped a familiar tune and fell silent, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and my hands gave off an unpleasant tingling. Everyone has misdialed numbers, of course. But in my case, I immediately hung up. It's gotten to the point here is not at all that the friend changed her number. And not in network glitches. I didn't want to believe that the shit got here, but in the depths of my soul I understood, that's it. I burst into the apartment, as if I had gone, and immediately rushed to the computer. After a couple of clicks, I was already looking at the VK page of a friend. Yes, of course. What was I waiting for? The page has been deleted or has not yet been created. Fuck your ears. On the way, I managed to dial her 20 more times and listen to the icy voice of the answering machine 20 times. At that moment, more than anything else in the world, I wanted only one thing, to find out that the aforementioned friend, on whom I shit the deepest, if in garlic, is still alive, healthy, and, most importantly, that our mutual acquaintances are aware of her existence. Not giving a damn what they would think of me, I arranged a mass VK mailing with the question, they say, "Who knows where such and such has gone?" The general response was so predictable that it made me want to cry. I'm sorry, who? Fall to your graves. And now what do you want me to do? Go back to the doctors. Excuse me, my houses, premises, and people are disappearing here. Would you prescribe a pill? Oh well. Ask friends and family for help. And what will they do? Will they also disappear? Maybe act out your teenage fantasies by taking my own life. I do not want that. Really. I didn't do any of this. Instead of all the above options, I locked the front door, closed all the curtains in the apartment, for some reason lit a couple of candles. I subconsciously saved electricity, sat down in front of the computer, and now I write. I write slowly. I have nowhere else to go in a hurry. I carefully recall every detail of past events. I try not to skimp on details. I even sketched out an outline of the story before I started writing it. Me, who hated compositions all my school life. Funny. After all, I lived a very boring life. I won't hide it, the story with Snitch has probably become. Yes, that's right, it was the most exciting, most significant story in my life. Nothing more interesting has happened to me and nor in the future. And since I want to leave at least something behind, why not, in that case, tell the story of Snitch? Anything is better than nothing, like Linje cheating on me with Leshka, or how the boys and I smoked in someone's hut. To be honest, I don't even know if all this scribble will get on the internet. At least on the internet, where there are still potential readers. Maybe no one will ever read it, or maybe I'll be lucky and some lover of mystical stories will dig up Informer in order to put it on the appropriate resource later. It's been a little over a week since I started writing. During this time, the list of my VK friends has reduced from 200 to 50. I would like to believe that I'm just losing popularity. True, I would like to. It is a pity that disappearing accounts dispel this illusion. Most of the numbers in the phone have become unknown. Some just disappeared, but I don't remember them by heart. Once I could not stand the oppressive silence that oozed through the walls around me. Coming out onto the porch smelly, unshaven and rough, I decided in a semi-delirium to knock on the neighbor's door. On the change, I would come up with any excuses. I'll ask for cigarettes or ask if some asshole knocks on their door in the evenings. All these excuses evaporated from my brain at once at the sight of bare concrete walls in place of the neighbor's doors. With an empty head, like these walls, I returned to the apartment, again locking myself inside. And since then, he never tried to go outside again. A couple of days ago I soaked and ate the last moldy bread. You can play my ribs like a xylophone. I'm out of tea bags, cigarettes, canned food, and the tap water is barely dripping. But I don't care. Internet and electricity are still available. So, there is hope to finish the story before I disappear completely. Yes, I finally understand. It is not the world that disappears. I disappear. Like everyone unfortunate enough to run into a face-to-face snitch. Perhaps now, somewhere out there, in another dimension, N is bombarding the acquaintances from the World of Tanks forum with questions about my mysterious disappearance. Grandfather Mika shakes his head mournfully, and my unfortunate parents call the morgues. Perhaps not. Maybe the world is going to hell. As the doc said, either we will collapse into a swoon, or a time paradox will arise, as a result of which a chain reaction will break the structure of the space-time continuum and destroy the universe. Who knows, suddenly unlucky, and the second option happened. Then this story will definitely remain unread. But I don't care anymore, to be honest. Whether I die or the world dies, in any case, everything will end very soon. Now, as I write these lines, from my balcony I can see an absolutely empty yard. No trees, no houses, no track. In their place, only dug-up earth. Like a huge grave to the whole environment. I've been sleeping a lot lately. Sleep has always been a great way to deal with stress for me. And then, I have nothing else to do. I sleep, and I dream of the earth, loose, moist soil that surrounds me from all sides. I walk through it as if through air, and rows of murky windows stretch to my right. I understand that I cannot see them through the layer of earth, but in some incomprehensible way I see them. My peripheral vision betrays everything. There, behind the glass, a huge, densely stuffed mass moves, similar to the fused bodies of dying reptiles, on the accumulation of cadaveric worms, to TV screen interference. I don't want to know what the contents of the windows actually look like. But in the depths of my soul I still know that it will be similar to that creature crawling along the wall of the Khrushchev building. It flows from me. From the brilliance of my pupils, from the movement of my shadow, from the rustle of my steps. It clings, seeping into the skin like water into sand, and continues to stir inside. I'm sorry, I can't say that I won't be able to stand it soon. From here there is no way out. There is no end. Perhaps there is no beginning. Now I'm not sure if the world was once different, or I just made it up out of boredom, but in fact, there was never anything, only the earth, windows, endless steps and the trembling of something strange under the skin. I am no longer afraid to think about what will happen when even dreams disappear.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.